Was it a mistake then not to offer this referendum before the general election?
Well, I think we've got to recognise the result of the election. We've got a majority Conservative government. It was a key part of their election campaign. It was in their manifesto, and it's going to be the top item in the Queen's speech. And we had a choice to make after the election. We could have spent the period between now and the referendum continuing to argue about whether or not it should take place, or focused on what is now the bigger issue, which is whether or not Britain stays a member of the European Union.
This is something different here. This is the Labour Party's official policy, saying we now support a referendum, which is very different, as I said there, from the policy you went into the general election with. And it comes down to this issue, and Lisa Markwell from the Independent on Sunday, the editor of the Independent on Sunday, was making this. What are your core beliefs? Does Labour believe there should be a referendum, or there shouldn't be one? Or is this just because there is going to be one, you say we might as well join in?
We recognise that it's going to happen, and we've got a choice to make now.
But you'd rather there wasn't one?
Well, we fought the election saying this posed big risks to the UK if we came out of the European Union, and it does pose big risks to the UK if
so you'd rather there wasn't
one? The European Union. But there's going to be a referendum, so we had a choice to make as an opposition. Do we continue to argue whether or not there should be a referendum in the face of legislation that's going to go through the House of Commons, or do we concentrate here on the key issue for the future of the UK, for our place in the world in terms of trade and jobs and investment? And that's what we're going to do. So the legislation will go through.
It's a bit confusing then, because, Mr Cameron is, and it's still ill-defined exactly what he's going to be asking for, but he's going in there, and we can see, from the get-go, so to speak, he's been out there making those contacts with European leaders, with EC leaders. What does Labour want? What does Labour want in terms of renegotiation, or doesn't it want one at all?
Well, we've set out a few things in terms of the changes we want to see. We want to see a deepening of the single market, especially when it comes to services, where this country is strong.
That's not exactly something that the rest of Europe doesn't want, is it?
Well, they say they want, but it's not happened so far, and the single market project is still very incomplete. We've said we want to see some changes in terms of benefits and migration. And we've also said that we want to make sure that the UK as a country outside the euro is not going to be treated in any way as a second-class citizen in the future. So there are a number of changes.
Well, say those things don't transpire. Say you don't get those. Does Labour recommend a no vote? Or is it yes, come what may?
I can't see circumstances where we would recommend a no vote, because the other side of the ledger is this is our main export market for over 40% of our exports. It's the source of half the inward investment that comes into the UK. It's also very important now for our peace and security when we see what's happening in terms of Russia and the Ukraine and so on. So it's possible to argue for reform and change in an organisation without also wanting to threaten
you know more about negotiations than I do, but that would be a fairly weak hand to take into any negotiations, isn't it? We want these things, but if we don't get them, we'll vote yes anyway.
I don't think that the European Union necessarily always works best by always threatening to leave. We've achieved change in the past by working with others. The Prime Minister is going to have to get some agreement from others to some of the changes that he wants. So let's see what he comes up with. But he too has some issues here, because in terms of the programme that he's set out so far, there is nothing that he could renegotiate that will satisfy a good number of his backbenchers who want to come out, come what may. So there is a big challenge for him in these negotiations to try to keep this Conservative Party, which has just won the election, together, because there are, I don't know how many, but there's a significant number of backbenchers who will want to come out, come what may in these.
But you didn't really answer that question about the general election campaign, and whether, there's a lot of analysis, and I've already talked about, what went wrong with Labour's campaign, and we talked particularly about the inroads that UKIP made into your vote. Sure. Is this a direct response to that? It is, isn't it? That you feel that if you had offered an EU referendum, and Nigel Farage said he was very surprised that Labour didn't offer one before the general election, and he saw that as your biggest error. Is that now accepted within Labour?
No, I don't think that's the case. You don't win or lose an election for just one reason. I wouldn't put our stance on this down as being a definitive part of our election result, and I don't think the response to UKIP and what they're preaching is to try and mimic them, ape them, or follow them, because I think a future for the UK by pulling out of the European Union would be tremendously damaging to jobs, to trade, to investment, and to our place in the world. So what we're going to do in the time between now and the referendum is to make that case as strongly as possible. You will not see Labour responding to UKIP by some kind of pale imitation of it, because we've got a very different view of Britain's place in the world.